Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Dark Horse IndyCar DW12 series live from Legacy Pocono this evening, brought to you by Flat Out Racing Network. My name is Scott Rankin. Unfortunately, alongside of me, Seth Cole is missing in the booth, but that's okay. We've replaced him. I think it's personally an upgrade. Alex Kolonix, do you think it's an upgrade over Seth Cole?
I mean, no offense to Seth, but I'm a better driver. I think I know what I'm talking about here. Hey.
Oh, it's going to be a fun night. It's going to be a fun night. Festivities and Pocono-related track incidences and racing and, all that other stuff as well. Final moments of practice underway out on track at the moment. Top of the board, Matt Wagner at this point in time. Was talking to him a little bit earlier pre-show. That lap that's put in towards the top of the board from the practice session is a qualifying setup with a little bit of draft, but the qualifying will be opening up here in about 10-15 seconds time. Things are going to get really tight. Your championship leader, Nick de Groot, currently all the way down in 6th place. He's got a bit of a margin, though. But Matt Wagner has been on the resurgence the last couple of weeks. Can tonight be the night that he finally starts to go on the attack towards Nick de Groot?
It could very well be that, but I'm a little bit coming in new to this series. I'm not particularly familiar with who's been strong here tonight, but I am quite familiar here with these cars at this track. I mean, I may not run the Indy cars much, but I am very familiar with it here at Pocono Raceway. So I'm excited to see how these guys do, because I'd say this is one of the most racy tracks the Indy cars go to.
Pocono, 2.5 miles, 3 turns. You've got turn number 1, you've got the tunnel turn, and then you've got turn number 3. Just about every single part of this track is unique in its own way. The tricky triangle. In terms of tracks, they don't come much trickier. There's only about Darlington, and the Indy cars don't really go there. It is going to be a phenomenal race in store. I can already see 3 cars that are out on track at this point in time. So you've got Jeff Highsong. You've also got Jim Brooks and Charles Teed, it looks like, are the 3 that have taken to the track. A few more guys will start taking out now, and it'll be Jeff Highsong that'll be first across the line to start his first flying lap of the evening. And tire temperatures, they're critical around here because you've got to get the cars and the tires to respond to you on that first lap. And by the second lap, did I hear they were overheating, Alex?
Well, I mean, I'd imagine with how much speed you're carrying through these corners, the tires would be starting to suffer a little bit, and there would be having some heat, and it might struggle to get a good one on the second lap.
Yeah, got to look after those tires here tonight. Don't forget, keep your eyes on Luis Nunez, who has been on the ascendancy the last few weeks in a very, very strong race out of Homestead, Miami, only for it to all come undone in traffic about 3/4 of the way through the race, and things started to unravel for him. He has been putting in some really strong races, putting in a lot of practice. He's really looking to grab this one and see if he can't start trying to wrestle some points back. But let's go over the point standings as they sit at this time. Nick de Groot, championship leader, 5 starts, only the 1 win, but he has taken 2 poles so far this season. That's been critical for keeping him up and out of the trouble. He's at 253 points. Matt Wagner currently occupies 2nd position. He is 220 points after 5 races. Also has the 1 pole, but that has been the driver that's been on form lately. 2 wins to his name. He's really starting to get that season fired up. And if Nick de Groot falls a little bit by the wayside here tonight, that championship battle will close up quite exceptionally. Another 14 points back as Craig Forsyth grabs himself another spot further up the ladder after last week, also sitting at 2 wins. No poles so far this season for Craig Forsyth, so it looks like qualifying for him has been the issue. And then another 15 points further back is Luis Gonzalez Nunez. We just talked about him. He's had a couple of really strong races. Things haven't quite always gone his way. He'll be looking for another solid turnout. He's at 191 points. And only 1 point further back is Gael Brooks at 190 points. Again, Gael not having the fantastic season he would have liked to. He is starting to grab some points for himself. And Jim Brooks, his dad, only 9 points further back. That covers your top 6. That's 181 for Jim Brooks. Season is, after this race, halfway over. This is the halfway point. This is where you start to settle in. And Nick de Groot, well, he's got a 33-point buffer. Alex, you got to build a season to become the champion. Do you think you got a little bit conservative here tonight?
I mean, for sure, but I think the problem here at Pocono is the moment you start playing conservative, it's going to lose some spots. So he's going to have to watch out tonight. He might just have to race aggressive just to keep positions.
And let's talk about probably the elephant in the room as well. This is the Legacy edition of Pocono. Legacy IndyCar, DW12, old variation of the car, means we come to an old variation on the track. that is going to be an interesting factor for these guys to work through, because
those inside curbs, especially down there in the tunnel turn, with the way the line is around that corner, those guys are going to be running very, very close to that curb, and if they clip it, they could very easily lose the race car, whether that be spinning it out or out into the inside wall. So that's going to be a corner I'm going to be watching tonight, especially for guys in dirty air to be able to negotiate it.
All right, well, qualifying time starting to come in thick and fast. It's going to be Charles T that takes an early ascendancy on the qualifying board. A very quick lap time from him. It's a 40.954. Matt Wagner right now coming around the final corner. He'll cross the line on his flying lap. We'll see what this does. Crosses the start-finish line. It's a 40.960. It's only good enough for third. And I tell you what, at this point in time, Nick de Groot also hasn't completed a qualifying lap. He's going to start from the tail end of the field. That is qualifying. That is it. It's in the books. It's over and done. And let's talk about the margins that separate our competitors here tonight. Charles Teed takes his pole position tonight with a 40.954 by 2/1000ths of a second, Alex. That's how close our drivers are.
Yeah, and it's his first pole position of the season as well, so congratulations for him to be starting out on the front row, but I'm not sure how much that's going to make a difference here at Pocono. So maybe the strategy from Nick de Groot to purposefully try and stay in the back early on in the race might work out for him.
Yeah, I'll be looking to grab positions away. I believe there's actually bonus points that do get assigned for most positions gained in the race. So I might have to look that up and get correction on that. But that's anytime you stick bonus points in the books, it's important. But it's also good practice for overtaking, because overtaking some of these heavy draft tracks can sometimes be quite difficult. Again, speed into the corners. That's the critical factor.
Yeah, this racetrack is really going to have to maximize these guys' corner speed, as once they get to the straightaway, there's not much else other than a draft, and especially if you're out up front, you got to take advantage of that clean air that you got. If you can't get that corner fast, those guys are going to be right on your bumper going down that straightaway.
So it's going to be about momentum off the corner and then momentum into the next corner to get your overtakes done. The draft is going to be critical to get your overtaking done. It's going to be a close race tonight. There are 14 drivers that will be taking the green flag here this evening. Most of them already forming up onto the grid. Let's talk about our grid as it lines up. Charles T, we just mentioned the 954 from him. Jari Brubacher, another solid qualifying effort from Jari. He was up and in the points. He was running very, very well last week. 40.956. He'll be a little bit disappointed by the tune of 2/1000ths of a second to miss out on that pole. Matt Wagner, I think this is his best qualifying effort of the season. Sorry, my apologies. He's got one pole. So the P3, this is a really good start for Matt Wagner as well with a 40.960. 8/1000ths of a second further back. 14/1000ths of a second covering the top four. It's Gael Brooks with a 968. Eric Schaus will line up off of the next row behind him with a 40.989. Jim Brooks, 5/1000ths of a second there, will line off alongside him. Eric Peterson, the first of our qualifying drivers with a 41 lap time, 41.005. Luis Gonzalez Nunez, a long way back for him with a 41.030. H.E. Hobson, 41.045. Craig Forsyth, 41.057. Haisong, 41.082. 41.182 for Gary Corley was the last of our qualified drivers. Nick de Groot, Joseph Morales, neither of those guys set a time, so that's your 14 cars on the grid. And I tell you what, Craig Forsyth, championship contender Craig Forsyth, long way down. That's going to be a recovery effort from him, but he's had 2 wins already this season. He knows how to fight through the pack.
If you know how to win these races, you definitely know how to make your way up to the front and stay up front. And to your point earlier in the race about Nick de Groot not setting down a lap time, looking here at the point structure of this series, 5 points awarded to the driver who gains the most positions. So Nick de Groot setting him up perfectly to try and get those bonus points right now. But to Charles Teed getting his first pole of the season, he gets 2 points for that. So that there's here and there of starting in the back and starting at the front. You get points for starting out front, but if you're in the back and can find your way up to the front, you'll get more points for it.
Yeah, so it's risk versus reward, because we talked about it a little bit last week, I believe, between Seth and I. It's risk. You never confirm that you're going to get a pole, and if you start at the back end of the field and you know that you're always going to be finishing in the top 5, you know that you're getting the most positions gained, and that's a lower risk, but it does take the risk of driving through. Rounding turn number 3, the drivers are getting set to take their first green flag of the evening. Charles T will have control of the field for the first time this season on an initial green flag. What's the jump going to be like? Jari Brubacher to his outside. Keep your eyes on the fast Matt Wagner. And here they go. They're off and racing on the long straightaway down to turn number 1. Charles Teed is going to hold that middle line. Matt Wagner's going to show the nose to the inside. The draft already proving its worth. We're going to be 3 wide down into turn number 1, and Matt Wagner takes the lead of the motor race from turn number 1. Charles Teed's going to slot in nicely behind him, or is it Eric Schaus? Schaus has grabbed a few spots away, but I tell you, this is going to be a critical motor race. The guys are battling for positions very early on. Keep your eyes on Yari to the outside. Charles Teed still looking to take that spot away from him, finally gets clear. Schaus has had a phenomenal start off of the grid, and now Teed is going to go down the inside of Matt Wagner. He's going to get aggressive, 3 wide through 2 corners on lap number 1, and it is going to be Charles Teed that grabs the lead. However, the momentum to the top side for Matt Wagner, and here comes Schaus. Schaus to the inside, we're back to 3 wide, Alex, 3 wide.
This is exactly what Pocono promotes right here. This is the exact kind of racing. That was a fantastic move from Matt Wagner to find his way to the front, but immediately Pocono showed its teeth and immediately back to third already with Eric Schaus leading the field down into the tunnel turn. I'd say if you could lead down into the tunnel turn, it's going to be a lot easier to hold it, but clearly these guys are finding ways to get through turn 3 to help them down the straightaway as Charles Teed looks to the inside into 3.
And Matt Wagner looking for the top side of the track. He's looking to build some momentum here. He has got AJ Hobson to his inside. So Hobson's starting to make his way forward. Yari Brupacker, a big loser in the opening couple laps. Peterson's starting to get aggressive as well. We're 3 wide once again to the inside. Is it Schaus that has the note ahead? No, it's Hobson for the first time tonight. Gets his nose ahead, and we're in for a long night of pack racing. And 3 wide every lap of the motor race so far.
This is exactly what I was talking about, and for somebody like Nick DeGroot starting in the back of the pack here, this is exactly what you want to see. These guys racing slows them all up and gives them an opportunity to find his way through the front without having to try nearly as hard, but we see Charles Teed, our pole sitter, be very, very strong. Every single lap, he's found his way right back to the front of the pack and actually gaps a little bit coming out of turn 3. That's a big help to not have the drivers behind you be as close coming out of that corner. 3 wide behind him.
And look at them spread. Charles Teed had the lead off of 3, gets to the inside. Matt Wagner going to run in the middle with 3 wide again. Little bit of a push up off the inside for AJ Hobson. They all managed to settle it back down. Hobson's down to momentum. Schaus is going to go defensive. He's looking to follow along. He's looking to get the draft. Brupacker is going to look to the inside of Matt Wagner. Wagner takes the high line, gets it defensively. We're only 4 laps into 100, boys. Settle it all down, or else I'm going to be out of wind before we hit halfway.
I think this will be where they start to settle down, as I almost saw a driver rear end each other there into turn 3. The tires are starting to heat up. That bottom lane's starting to get a lot slower. It's getting a lot harder to pass, but you set yourself up well. It won't matter once you get to the straightaway.
IndyCars, the critical factor to them, Alex, is the dirty air. Talk to us about how the drivers can prevent the impacts of the dirty air and what they've got to do when they're not the lead car.
Well, from my understanding of these vehicles is that simply backing up the corner is one answer to your problem, but at a track that's this fast at Pocono Raceway, it might just be a good idea just to take a completely different lane to the car up front. These guys have a few different options in these corners, especially down there in turn 3. There's about 3 or 4 different lanes you could try and take to try and get a shot down the straightaway. As we see for the lead, Charles Teed and Eric Schaus looking very close. Schaus thought he had a run, but it seemed to have died out down the straightaway.
Well, Schaus is going to have to settle it back in. He may be looking to fuel save a little bit. Fuel is something that will become a critical factor in this race, as I'm just keeping my eyes in the background as well. Joseph Morales has now dropped 1.5 seconds back off of the lead of the pack. Everyone else is still in this back formation, figuring themselves out. Nick DeGroot up from 13th on the grid all the way to 9th at this point in time, looking to make the moves that he needs to. And Craig Forsyth as well started a little bit lower down. He's moved up into 6th. Fuel saving, it's very, very close. There is going to be a splash and dash if we go green the whole way.
Yeah, there very well will be. Information we got from some of the drivers here before the broadcast was that their first fuel load's going to be around 20 to 22 laps, and then after that will be 22 to 23 laps. So these drivers are not going to be able to make it on just 3 pit stops. They're going to have to at least make another one. That last one's going to have to be a very short one if we do manage to go green all the way.
The nature of Pocono, Alex, you got to have a drafting buddy when you go for that pit cycle, so the undercut, it doesn't actually work here.
Yeah, I've made that mistake in my home field of the stock cars. Even there, the draft is a huge factor, and I once made a pit stop on my own and found myself seconds off the field. So in these Indy cars where the draft is even bigger than that, you gotta make sure you at least come in with one other person, otherwise you may be lost for rights.
Well, Matt Wagner led the opening corner of the motor race. It started to drift further back. He's down in fifth. Craig Forsyth going to start attacking his rear bumper, and keep your eyes in the background as well. Nick de Groot now starting to work over Yari Brewparker. Forsyth looks to be assaulting at the moment because he needs to a little bit. I'm wondering whether or not Wagner is saving some tires, saving some fuel. That tends to be the strategy he goes with, but Charles Teed, he seems to be the guy that wants to control the motor race as well. Bonus points critically for most laps led in this one as well. At the moment, Charles Teed, I believe, has led the most laps at this point in time, but it is changing lap by lap.
Yeah, and I've been watching Eric Schaus behind him in the second position. He's come off of turn 3 a good number of times with a pretty easy opportunity to make the maneuver, but has decided not to. So that could be a bit of a fuel strategy. Try and stretch it out a little bit while still keeping pace so that that final pit stop is a little bit shorter.
And have a look at Matt Wagner at the moment. A bit of the cork in the bottle style moment. Jim Brooks, the battle's building behind him. Brooks was getting very aggressive, very close to that rear bumper of Matt Wagner going down into turn number 1. He's settled out a little bit. Wagner seems to be strong in turn number 2, turn number 3, and everybody else is strong behind him. Now Forsyth will be the one that'll have a go at Matt Wagner. Will it be into turn 1? Will it be into the turn 2? We're about to find out. It was too wide as well. Yari Brewparker was the loser that time by in the tunnel turn. Had to take to the inside, lost the draft, drifted a little bit further back, so Nick de Groot grabs another spot in this race so far.
Yeah, we've got our 3 championship leaders here down here, 4th, 5th, and 6th. They're trying to make their way towards the front with Craig and de Groot, but I'm interested that Matt Wagner is sitting in the position he is. He hasn't been as aggressive to try and find positions, and when he does, he seems to lose out on them pretty quickly. That'll be something I'm going to be watching tonight because he's been making really strong moves, but just hasn't been able to keep the position following it, as side by side for the lead, Eric Schaus makes the move.
Well, we'll see if he can get this one done. He's all the way to the bottom of the track, but it's the momentum from that high line. We see this time and time again. Whenever you come to Pocono, you want to be on the top side for the run off the corners. Teed takes that one once again. And to your point, Alex, do you think that it's the fact that de Groot and Forsyth are starting to make moves that says, Matt Wagner, I need to be a little bit further to the front? Yellow's out. Caution for something, and it's in the tunnel turn. There's a car buried in the fence back there.
Ooh, Nunez around upside down at the exit of the tunnel turn. That might end his race, I believe. Now, these drivers do have one faster pair to utilize for the race tonight. However, him having a tow could possibly end his night, as he will likely go at least 1, maybe even 2 laps down.
Yeah, it looks like, just taking a quick look at it, I'm sure we'll get it up in a replay here in a few moments as well. It looks like Nunez coming from the high side, trying to get to the bottom, had a little bit more grip, and Peterson was still in the dirty air. That's unfortunate for him, and like I said, he's had a strong couple of weeks over the last few weeks. He's been there, and he just hasn't put the final notes on it. It is incredibly difficult at a high standard of racing, Alex. You've been a part of this as well, to go from, yes, I'm good enough to win some of these races, but I need to make a faultless race. I need to be in the hunt, in competitive mode at the right times, and not make a mistake. And that looks like, unfortunately, it's just another mistake for Nunez.
Yeah, that was one of my largest learning curves last year, was to try and just find a way to not make mistakes while still keeping some of my speed. I probably did it the wrong way of trying to find speed before trying to be careful, and so it took me a lot longer, but these drivers, they do have the advantage of these Indy cars at these oval tracks, a little bit less punishing to be a little bit off pace. And so these drivers ought to focus more on just not making mistakes, as we saw down there, down in the tunnel turn, which I mentioned the curb earlier, but even more so than the curb is the dirty air. That corner is the fastest corner on the racetrack for these cars and provides the most dirty air and is the hardest to negotiate while behind other drivers. And we saw that right there as driver pushed up into Nunez.
Well, scattering drivers entering pit lane, everyone looking for access to the fast lane, and everyone looking for their way onto pit road. It looks like Matt Wagner will cycle out in P number 4 once he gets into his box. Of course, that may change. One all the way down the end. Charles Teed has got the last pit base, so he's immediately going to have an advantage, and he's leading the field into their pit stalls for the first time around, and I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that we see every car in the field come down for a fresh set of tires and top fuel tank at this point of the race, Alex.
Yeah, it looked like Matt Wagner had a fantastic pit stop, found his way into the second position coming off the pit lane. So great stop by Wagner, jumped 2 positions there. But the timing of this caution's unique. They went just about 11, 12 laps before the caution came out. That's going to cut off that final short pit stop that we were expecting to see if this race were to go green. So these guys have now 3 dedicated pit stops to make before the end of this race. Once again, if it goes green, but as we saw right there, there's no guarantees.
One of the critical things I think I was keeping an eye on in the middle of that stint there as well is I'm wondering whether or not Matt Wagner got a little bit too aggressive on those tires a little bit too early. And maybe he burned off a little bit. He went into save mode to rebuild his way back through, and you were starting to see him have a go there right before the caution flag came out. Tire wear, when do you push? It's the age-old question. You got to win a race by going slowly as fast as you possibly can, and by slowly we mean looking after everything. But it's when do you push, and there's never a perfect answer about when to push. It's a driver intuition.
Yeah, at other racetracks, you could simply say, all right, now's the time to get going. I feel like the pace has come off to this certain point. But at a track with this much draft, it's not really a matter of how hard do I push the corners. It's a matter of how hard do I try and pass the car in front of me. Because now, rather than at a place like Iowa or Kansas where you're having to worry about tight corners that'll really wear down the tires a ton and a very short straightaway right before you get to it, you're worrying about how can I manage the corner, pass the guy, and make sure I could secure that pass to not get caught in a bad position on corner entry.
Ooh, critical to note. I've just had a quick look up at my second monitor. It looks like we've got 2 cars coming back down. It's Gael Brooks and Joseph Morales. Now, Joseph Morales was at the tail end of the field. Is it Yari Brubacher as well has come in? So only 3 cars actually on pit road at this point in time have all come back down for an additional splash. These cars were pit lane track position compromised. When you're at the tail end of a field, it's effectively an extra free stopper. You got to find an advantage over your competition some way, and well, when you haven't got an advantage in track position, you can make that advantage in the pit stop.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Pocono, big full throttle racetrack, not a lot of off throttle time, so fuel's a big deal, and the more you're running laps around here, the more fuel you're going to burn. Very, very long lap. So, I mean, that extra little lap on fuel may have been under caution, but they still burned a good little bit of fuel, and that could make the difference later in the race. If you could have a shorter pit stop, you might find yourself up on some track position.
It's shorter pit stops, it's all the way to go. And now, with that extra pit stop taken out of the equation, I was going to ask you earlier on, do you think it's going to be tough? Because we haven't seen a full fuel stint yet to see what the time fall away is and how bad the tires are for the guys that are in the mid-pack. But did you think that a fuel-only stop was a question mark? Or do you think you've always got to take tires here?
I mean, Pocono is one of the racetracks for me that I find that the tire wear is not particularly as big as other racetracks. These guys only really fell off about 1 to 2 tenths over their entire run. As the pace car's in, they were going to be going green.
Yes, the Charles T's going to lead him away. Schaus bobbled in the middle of the pack. There's a lot of bobbling going on all the way down the field. Schaus is dropping like a rock. So from a guy who was leading laps just a few moments ago, he's a long way back. Matt Wagner isn't quite attached to Charles Teed's rear bumper, and Teed has got the perfect restart to lead us back into 1 and 2. And that margin back to Craig Forsyth. Now, Craig Forsyth is the car that's in 3rd place, and keep your eyes back as well for Nick de Groot. Nick de Groot is all the way back in 6th position as a group of 2, a group of 3, and a group of 2. Nick de Groot is in that 3rd bunch. He's going to make some time up here to put some pressure on Forsyth.
That was an absolutely horrible restart there from Eric Schaus. He tried to lay back a little bit to try and get a run down the front straightaway, but timed it just a little bit off and made contact with the back end of Craig Forsyth. So those 2 cars probably have a little bit of damage, front end and rear end. And so that's allowed these 2 out front to pull an over 1 second gap over the field. That might be just enough that you could just run your normal line and battle with each other, not have to worry about somebody in the 3rd position trying past you.
Well, Wagner's going to get defensive. He did take the high line through turn number 3. Got the momentum off the corner. It took the length of the straight to get clear of Charles Teed, but he eventually got there. Now Teed lines him back up again. Gets the draft through the tunnel turn. Wagner tries to turn in. Teed holds him high and dry. Wagner had to lift out of that one. Charles Teed is going to lead another lap in the motor race. takes the advantage once again. So Wagner and T, they could swap draft here. They could start to pull away from the field, but it looks like these guys don't necessarily want to work together all that much. Wagner now to the inside is going to take the momentum. Now, will Teed swap draft here? Are we going to get a slingshot style effect from these two?
We most likely will. I mean, it just seems like each driver is making a move at the opposite end of the racetrack. I've noticed Charles Teed is fantastic at getting through the tunnel turn behind drivers and getting his way into position out of turn 3. If he could park his way in front of other drivers at turn 3, it's a bit long, flat corner. It could really struggle to get the driver behind him to find a run. But at the same time, Matt Wagner's been fantastic at getting a pass done down into turn 1. So these drivers are just going to keep flip-flopping if they keep racing like this, as AJ Hobson is finding ground on them.
Yeah, so the slingshot, the window for it, I think, is now closed. Teed and Wagner, they're going to continue to try and work together at this point in time. You saw them, they were racing quite hard on those opening couple of laps when you thought, oh yes, priority in this pack is very, very important. Then the break happened. Well, the break might start to close, although that gap is blown out just a little bit. It might be enough. It's right on the bubble, though. And keep your eyes back there as well. Nick de Groot. Well, he started the race down in 13th position. I believe he started the restart about 8th position. He's now in P number 3. Teed will go to the inside. AJ Hobson's going to go along with Nick de Groot as well. This is critical for everyone's race. Is Hobson. Hobson will send it to the inside, I believe. He's going to take the spot away. Keep your eyes on Jim Brooks, who's trying to slot in behind Nick de Groot as well. Forsyth and Schaus might have had contact on the restart. They're still there. Is this allowing Teed and Wagner to get away, though? That margin's opened up once again, Alex.
These guys are racing aggressively behind him, but at the same time, they're racing just as aggressive as the front two. Neither of them are really losing that much time over each other, as you see, once again, Charles G trades in turn 3, but Wagner's a lot closer this time. He's actually going to not pass him and actually try and push him down the straightaway as the two behind are battling. So now they've started to organize it out a little bit. They might just try and stay in line, realizing the gap that they have behind, especially the championship leader, Nick de Groot, being involved in that tight battle. If they could stop him from winning this race, that's going to be a nice points haul for the two of them.
Look, let's talk about it. It's stock cars tend to be the most understood form of oval racing that exists. Indy cars, they're very, very different. Talk to us about a little bit. Stock cars that are in this position, they wouldn't squabble. They wouldn't work together in this sort of a format. They'd be squabbling a little bit for the positions. They might not work together like these guys do, but it's in Charles Teed and Matt Wagner's best interest to swap the lead.
Driver in the background into the inside pit wall. I'm not sure exactly who that was.
Gary Corley looks like.
Yeah, Gary Corley just took a hard left out of turn 3 and fell into the pit wall. What I'm looking at the replay, it looks like he hit the outside wall coming out of turn 3, and it just sent the car down into the pit lane.
That's unfortunate for Gary Corley. He's had a tough season to date so far. This will give us the replay as we're seeing it on screen at this point in time. Yeah, bounces off the outside wall. Good news is, he's the only one involved in that one. Now, if there's a real-life crash, I'm very worried about some concussions. Good news, iRacing doesn't deliver concussions.
Yeah, luckily driver health is not an issue we need to worry about here in the virtual sim racing world, so luckily you can run a little bit harder and not have to worry about it.
Oh, look, commentator asphyxiation, running out of air sometimes is a problem you have to deal here in the commentary booth, but yeah, luckily for the drivers, they don't have to deal with those injuries. Hands and wrists sometimes, concussions and head injuries, no, not a real big issue. Well, yeah, I mean, you can headbutt the rig when you get in and out of it sometimes, but that's a...
Yeah, I have reason to believe that you called upon a witch to cause that accident. You mentioned stock car racing and a driver crashed in the background, so I feel you did that to him.
Oh, I mentioned a dirty word in IndyCar League, stock car racing. How dare I? Slapping on the wrist. Oh, Alex, it's going to be a long broadcast, I think, with the two of us.
Yes, but actually, to get back to your question before that accident happened, you were talking about whether the stock car guys would work with each other, thinking they'd squabble a bit more. I'd actually argue they'd be more likely to work together. Here in IndyCar, you can't really bump each other without risking damaging your race car, but there in NASCAR, you can bump pretty hard at this racetrack. We almost treat Pocono like it's a miniature super speedway with how the cars work. Now, it will be interesting to see with the new next-gen vehicle whether or not that's still a thing, but in Pocono of the past, you would pretty much bump each other like it's a super speedway, but you can't do that here in IndyCar. So it's interesting to watch these guys, how they find ways to work together or not work together.
That's it. That's it. Looking after the car is absolutely critical. It's priority number one. At this point in time, keep your eyes peeled on Matt Wagner and Charles Teed. It looks like Teed is either fuel saving or his tires have started to go from racing Matt Wagner quite aggressively. Whole field at this point in time starts to have singled out. The secondary pack has started to catch back up. Nick de Groot, very quick at the moment, on his way up, all the way up to Charles Teed. And I have a feeling he might go for a move down into turn number one, but keep your eyes in the background as well. Jim Brooks, AJ Hobson. That's about the only battle that's going out on track. It's about the same distance when we received the first cautions into this stint. So this might be the time where that fuel burns off and, well, less weight in the rear end of the car. That does things. That does things to the way the car reacts.
Yeah, for sure. It makes it a lot tighter, makes the dirty air a lot more of a problem, as now these cars are going just a little bit faster. It's a little bit tighter in the rear end, so these guys have to deal with it a lot more. I mean, and then you combine the overheating and wear of the tires. That really makes it hard to make moves like we saw at the earlier restarts of these races. But somebody who doesn't seem to be suffering from that nearly as much is Nick de Groot, as he's looking to try and make that move there for the second position.
And the thing that we've seen from Nick de Groot on this run as well is it looks like he was a little bit passive in the early phases, let it come to him, and then he went for it, which is what he's doing right now to Charles T. Gets to the inside of the tunnel turn, move done, P2 now for Nick de Groot, and he is continuing to take chunks out of Matt Wagner. He's nearly there to his rear bumper now. He's going to get the run coming down the main straightaway. He's got to choose a different line. Had to lift. Was that Teed into the outside barrier? The car got real tight there. Teed has lost a lot of momentum. Down goes Jim Brooks. Down goes Schaus. The whole pack here has gone past Charles Teed. It looks like Teed has got damage, and that might be race ending for him if he doesn't get to the pit lane quickly.
Yeah, it looked like Nick de Groot ahead of him also got tight, and he was in the wake.
Did de Groot get the barrier?
De Groot luckily did not. I was watching him. He did not get the barrier. He got very close, but behind him, Charles Teed was following him in the dirty air and washed up into the wall right behind him. So for Charles Teed, his race is going to be severely hurt by that damage, I imagine, because these race cars are so fragile.
And all of a sudden, Matt Wagner has just escaped from this pack. He is 1.4 seconds out. He's out of the draft range. These guys are going to work together. De Groot is starting to recover. He's working with AJ Hobson. They're going to need to work this slingshot well. Gets to the inside. AJ will let him do it because he wants that momentum on this next straightaway. Can they start to chase in Matt Wagner? Because if Wagner goes now, he's gone.
Yeah, that's something I was looking to see if I could figure out in practice, is to see whether a single car could run as quickly as the pack around here. I mean, once again, I hate to bring it up, but stock cars again. I mean, when you're in the pack, it's so much faster than a single car. It's absolutely ludicrous. But in IndyCar here, you're going to be able to carry more corner speed. You're not going to have to deal with dirty air, and you're not going to have to deal with this right here, the side-by-side racing that puts both of you kind of out of position going into the corners. It's a lot harder to work together and just make your line faster, as that lap, Matt Wagner pulled out almost 2/10 on second place.
And that's critical, starting to get away at this period of time. Matt Wagner, let's talk about his season to date. The first couple races, he was just involved in this, that, and the other. Race would start, 5 laps later, Matt Wagner would be in the pit lane, and he would basically just like, his night is done. There's nothing he can really do it. He has recovered from that. Over the last few weeks, the man has been on form. He couldn't buy any luck to start his season. Now luck just seems to show up at his doorstep and say, hey, delivery for Matt Wagner. It's a whole bunch of luck. What can I take out of this one? Well, Nick de Groot is going to try and break that up, working with AJ Hobson. And remember, this is P1, P2 in the championship as well as Matt Wagner and Nick de Groot. So this is a battle that you are going to see over the remaining 6 rounds after this week going forward. So a lot to look forward to here. And as well, don't forget Craig Forsyth just lurking in the background there as well. I think he's fuel saving. I really do, Alex.
I mean, fuel saving is going to be interesting to see. Typically, I'd imagine you'd want to try and do it more after you take this next pit stop, because you're going to refuel the tank to full anyway. And if what you're saying earlier before the broadcast was right and you want to try and pit with other drivers, I'm actually questioning that thought process right now, because Matt Wagner is pulling a huge gap on the field every single lap. He's pulling out 1, 2, almost 3 tenths every single lap purely on his own.
I tell you what, I just had a look out the cockpit of Matt Wagner, and critically, Charles Teed had damage. Guess where he's come out? He's come out right in front of Matt Wagner, and Matt Wagner is actually getting drafting support off of him. This is critical, because all of a sudden, instead of being a single car breakaway, Charles Teed, who was racing for position early on, has fresh tires on board, that means speed, and he's offering draft support to Matt Wagner. Matt Wagner's in the perfect bubble.
I just checked up on the standings of this race so far. Nick DeGroot down to 5th place. Something must have happened down in the tunnel or turn 3. He's lost a lot of positions here on the racetrack.
It'll be interesting to see what he does with that. It'll be AJ Hobson and Jim Brooks who've got to work together now. And cast your mind last night to the Area 51 race. And it was actually Nick DeGroot and Jim Brooks that were swap drafting, and they ran a monster amount away from the field. They worked quite well together. So if those two drivers can get together, they know what's required for them to run away. Keep your eyes on that front wing of Nick DeGroot. I thought I saw something. I can't be sure. I'm wondering if something did happen, Alex. If you can go back and have a look at that one, we can find out what happened in that tunnel turn, because that's going to be critical, I think.
Yeah, I'll be going to check it right at the moment. But I'm checking... I'm not seeing anything as of right now. Frankly, I don't think he hit anything. And when I went to go check the replay, it actually looks like down in turn 3 is where he struggled. He ran the high side of turn 3 and just got a very tight exit, ran out a little bit wide, had to lift out of the throttle, and lost 3 positions off of it.
So let's actually talk about that, and that's critical as well, is this is legacy Pocono. There's a difference between this racetrack and the current generation of Pocono that's on iRace and the current generation of Pocono that exists in real life. Bumps is one thing, grip levels and banking is another.
Yeah, I've noticed the biggest difference, weirdly, is down in turn 1. The new Pocono has a lot more lines to choose down in that corner, especially in these cars. But then also turn 3, like you said, you can run almost right up against the wall on the new Pocono, but the old Pocono, the exit tightens up really, really hard. And so it's very hard to get off that corner. You're kind of forced to run that middle to arced bottom, as we see a couple of drivers coming down the pit lane now. We're actually starting to enter that fuel window.
Yeah, so it's going to be AJ Hobson, Eric Peterson, and Yari Brubaker who are in. Joseph Morales has already made his pit stop. Luis Nunez actually back out on track at this point in time as well, so he's still punching away, doing whatever he can. He's unfortunately trapped a lap down at this point in time. Charles Teed still in front of the leaders. And Luis Nunez is going to be boxing as well. Matt Wagner has just said on the radio that he's coming to the pit lane. So this is it. This is the critical lap number for all these drivers. They're going to make their way in. Where do they pop back out after the field shuffles itself up?
I'm actually going to be watching AJ Hobson here because he pit in pretty much entirely on his own and only were followed by 2 drivers that were almost a second or 2 back off of where he was. I'm not sure he's going to get much drafting help. If anything, he might lose some from behind. So I'm watching to see where he comes out of the pit lane here because Matt Wagner pit in with a lot of other drivers who are towards the front of the field.
And keep your eyes on the guys that are a little bit further up in the field as well. Remember Craig Forsyth, I said, I think he might have been fuel saving a little bit earlier on. Jim Brooks, Craig Forsyth, Eric Schaus, and Gael Brooks. All the drivers are still out on the track, yet to make their first green flag stop. Gael Brooks came back in, cycled around once more, through the pit lane for an extra splash of fuel. The other 2 drivers that did that have already come back down through pit lane. So, will Gael decide to go the extra lap? Yes, he has. So Gael has got another lap here. His final stop already. He's starting to take chunks out of the amount of fuel he needs to add to the car to get it to the end of the race.
I'm watching the gaps right at the moment. It looks as though on that pit stop, AJ Hobson may have gained 2-3 tenths on Matt Wagner. Out of the pit lane, I'm actually seeing he's gaining even a little bit more as of right now. So AJ Hobson, with that pit stop, has actually gained some lap time on the drivers in front of him.
Now, critically, have a look at where the cars are rejoining the circuit at this point in time. Hobson's got Forsyth now to navigate. Forsyth still getting up to speed. Jim Brooks may have just pulled a wild card out of his sleeves. He's pulled an ace. He's had a few cards held back up there, Jim Brooks. He's had an unlucky few couple of races, starting to try and put a season together, and he is quite close to Matt Wagner. Indeed, I think he is right on the verge of that draft bubble, and that recovers his race strongly. And additionally, he came to the pits that extra lap later. Gael Brooks now is going to exit the pit lane at this point in time. He's going to rejoin the train. We'll see if these drivers can work together, but we've just about single-filed out. Everyone's in a draft range of another car at this point in time. It's whether or not they're going to work together and how close they're going to get to that car in front.
Yeah, looking at the gaps right now, they came into the pit lane. Matt Wagner had almost a 2-second lead. Coming out of the pit lane, Matt Wagner is only just over a second in front of them. So he lost almost a full second of lap time coming into the pit lane. I'm not sure if he just had a slow stop. Maybe the pit crew was a little bit slow on that one, but he's lost a lot of time. And if the drivers behind him on newer tires, which is easier to work together, if they work together and find their way up there with the draft partnership, they might be able to challenge for this lead.
Well, at this point in time, I can tell you Jim Brooks ran a near identical time. Actually, Jim Brooks was just a fraction faster. However, AJ Hobson slower, Craig Forsyth slower, Eric Schaus slower, Nick DeGroot 4/10 faster. So DeGroot at this point in time is pushing hard, and he's just grabbed another spot away. So DeGroot is going to be the driver to keep your eyes on, and he's working with Eric Schaus at this point in time. We'll see if those guys can start to close up onto the rear bumper of Craig Forsyth, because that's going to be critical for their race. It's up and down the field at the moment. You're looking at these guys and you're going, yeah, they're not fighting right now, but this is actually, in terms of the overall race strategy, probably the most critical part of the race.
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue because you have at least 2 more pit stops to complete before the end of the race, and one of them being a little bit shorter because it's going to be just under 20 laps once they come into the pit lane. It's going to be interesting to see how these drivers make it in and out of the pit lane, what their pit stop time is. Now, luckily, unlike the series I'm familiar with, they do have a pit limiter, so they don't have to worry about the actual pit lane itself, but there's so much to be won and lost coming in and off the pit lane that we saw Matt Wagner was way out in front. Now he lost a lot of time to the drivers behind. It's going to be interesting to see if that happens again this next time around, because if that happens one more time, they'll be within the draft range for sure.
Yeah, well, one more lap in the books, one more lap led for Matt Wagner at this point in time, and he's starting to chalk those guys up. He might be picking himself up some bonus points for the most laps led here this evening. No support out in front at this point in time for Matt Wagner, and all of a sudden the pack in behind. Craig Forsyth, he's still in that fuel-saving mode. Nick DeGroot's come flown past him, and Forsyth just says, yeah, you know what, you take it. You go hunt them down, I'll just use your draft.
You know, I'm actually curious. You mentioned Nick DeGroot ran 4/10 faster. He's running very quick lap times. But we saw at the end of that last run, he fell off a surprising amount. He looked to be getting really, really tight, especially down into turn 3. He was kind of struggling to hold position around the corners. I wonder if he's just pushing too hard early on and it's hurting him in the back end of the runs.
Yeah, I mean, could be. We're talking about, again, speed. These cars entering the corners as fast as they do. That's heat. That's heat. The way the tires work, they scrub across the surface. Anytime that tire is, the way that they push themselves into the road to generate cornering grip, that requires heat. That requires friction. That's how you generate grip. You got no friction, you got no grip. It's like sliding across ice, sliding across water. There's no friction there. That's why ice skates work the way they do. That's why you slip over in puddles. These things, they need that little bit of heat in the tires. Too much heat. All of a sudden that grip goes away. The tire just turns to putty. And, well, putty don't stick and turn as well as a little bit of rubber in its current state. So, be interesting to see if he's managing that heat. One guy who doesn't have to manage tire heat really at all is Matt Wagner. I mean, no draft means all your aero devices, they all get the clean air to the front and the rear wing.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I find is the biggest difference overall from NASCAR to IndyCar, where we're all familiar, is that these aero platforms that the IndyCar has provide so much more cooling if you could have that clean air than what any kind of dirty air would produce in NASCAR. I mean, you're sitting here out front, these tires are getting cooled by the fresh air you're running into, the the wings are working a lot harder, providing a lot more downforce. It's putting a lot less friction into those tires. Everybody behind is suffering from that a lot more. I mean, I'm watching every single lap. Matt Wagner just pulls out more and more lap time, and he's running entirely on his own at a track that draft is so massive. I'm just amazed that he's doing this.
I just had a quick look over at my standings panel at this point in time, and I just saw Nick de Groot and Craig Forsyth switching back and forth, and they've just done so just now once again. That's going to be critical to their race. They're trying to settle themselves in at the same time as pulling some of that margin back up to the cars that are just up in front of them. So keep your eyes on them. As well, AJ Hobson, he is doing a phenomenal job at this point in time. Battling quite heavily away with Jim Brooks at this point in time. Are they working together at this? It looks a little bit like they are.
I mean, while they're trying to, they're not really clearing each other before the corners. They're racing into every single corner, and all that really does is slow them down. Like, I'd argue working together here in IndyCars would be backing up and getting such a big run down the straight that you could get single file again before the corner even happens. Like, down there, they did a pretty decent job of it because they were able to make the corner relatively clean, but here comes Nick de Groot to fight them. The two drivers behind, de Groot and Forsyth, have found pace and are right up on top of these two.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether or not in their minds they've hit a fuel number that they needed to get to, and now it's time to start boogieing. Matt Wagner, you let him get away, he's going to be very hard to topple, very hard to reel back in. At this point in time, that margin for Wagner is starting to extend itself out to close to 2 seconds. I think Nick de Groot, Craig Forsyth have taken a look over at each other on the straightaways and gone, yeah, we need to move, boys. We need to hustle. 3 wide once again. It's been a while since we've been 3 wide at Pocono, and it's going to be Brooks by the look at things lifting out of that one. Nick de Groot going to slot back in and behind Craig Forsyth. But now these guys have got control of this pack, and they were making time before with the swap drafting. Is it time for Nick de Groot and Craig Forsyth to go hunting down a Wagner?
I think we're going to see right here the swap drafting work really good. De Groot's got a really, really big run going down this front straightaway. He might be just about clear going into turn 1. Yeah, he will be. That is the better way to side draft. Both AJ Hobson and Jim Brooks were kind of further side by side, forcing each other into a lane they didn't want to run, and they weren't getting big enough runs to swap over as well. So de Groot and Forsyth are working a lot better with this pair drafting than the other two were, and it shows because they went from being 2.5 seconds back to only being 2.3 and also caught up to second and third place.
Yep, so moving through the field at this point in time, Jim Brooks, AJ Hobson, they look like they're happy to let this one sort of punch itself out and for it to run the way that it is. Eric Schaus as well, he's starting to climb a little bit back onto the rear bumper of this pack as well. So Schaus led a number of laps early on, fought quite heavily with Charles Teed. Things haven't gone Charles Teed's way again tonight, unfortunately. That guy, we're talking about Matt Wagner, can't buy any luck. Well, Charles Teed's another one of those drivers. He just seems to find trouble the instant that he gets himself into a good position, and another night so far this season for Charles Teed that has not gone his way. He's trying to play himself back into contention, though. He's not out of things at this point in time for your pole sitter. He's working, trying to get back up to the rear bumper of Jari Brubacher at this point in time, but Brubacher looks like he may have dropped him all the way off car into pit lane. That might have actually been Charles Teed. Indeed it is. That's why he's running a fair bit slower, because Charles Teed is off pit cycle compared to everyone else.
Yeah, and the one thing with Charles Teed was that when he had to pit because of the damage that he got, he actually didn't lose a lap. He was just ahead of the leader at the time, and we saw him racing pretty competitively with our current leader, Matt Wagner, before the incident that he had. So he has pace and can find himself back in this race if we get a caution.
Yeah, look, in a caution flag, all of a sudden, Charles Teed will have to go as hard as he possibly can. Rejoining the racing surface, at the moment he's going to be just in front of the leader. Looks like Matt Wagner might clear him. This might actually play perfectly either into Matt Wagner's hands, or I'm going to say AJ Hobson, Craig Forsyth, Nick de Groot's hands, because all of a sudden, they're going to have a car pulled along in the background. Now, alternatively, if Charles Teed gets in immediately onto Matt Wagner, and they swap drafting, well, you've got two teams of guys swap drafting. Well, it's kind of going to go nowhere, but they have to work it perfectly, and Teed is right in that bubble at the moment. This is indeed critical for Craig Forsyth, AJ Hobson, Nick de Groot, Jim Brooks, and Eric Schaus. You've got 5 cars in that next group. They want to get up here.
Yeah, I've been observing this whole race so far with how this draft has been working, and it seems to be these drivers almost top out a little bit going down into turn 1. They get these big runs coming out of turn 3, about halfway down the straightaway. They get over half a car length ahead of the car on the outside, and they can't keep going. It just seems like it stalls out. I wonder if the gearing is kind of just stopping them from going any quicker, but these runs are just not going anywhere.
Well, Charles Teed, Matt Wagner on the racing track. They didn't want to work together early on in this run. Well, they were forced to then immediately after that was they tried to punch away at things. Matt Wagner now settles in underneath the rear bumper of Charles Teed, punches by. You were looking at the onboard footage at that point in time from AJ Hobson. This will be his move as he goes to the inside of Craig Forsyth. That's the slingshot draft right there. You saw the momentum. He got on Craig Forsyth. Forsyth had to lift out a little bit, but that's how you make it work.
Yeah, and now, unlike before where Matt Wagner was entirely on his own out there at the front, he's got somebody he's battling with now. And for the position of Charles Teed, he needs to fight for this lead position so that he could stay on the lead lap if a caution were to come out. So he's going to race as hard as he can with Matt Wagner and try and keep him behind him. That's going to slow him up for all these drivers behind. They could find their way up there if this racing gets hard enough.
Well, having said that, this is also the first time that Matt Wagner's had dirty air on his car in a fair while, and his tyres are older. Charles Teed is on fresh tyres, and that's actually why Teed has pulled away just a little bit. 0.4 of a second from Matt Wagner was taken out of him by AJ Hobson on that last lap. So this is hampering him, Alex. He doesn't want Charles Teed there.
Yeah, he's losing time right now to both Craig Forsyth and AJ Hobson behind him. He just lost 2 tenths on that previous lap. And he might lose a little bit more here coming out of turn 3. He's losing a lot to Charles Teed. So this dirty air seems to be affecting him a good bit.
Well, we'll have to keep our eyes on what that margin does. And, well, we thought we might have seen some swap drafting. That's not the case. Initially, he was able to do it. Was Matt Wagner? Not anymore. Alternatively, is this fuel saving from Matt Wagner? He's been running out here on his own the whole time. Is he a little bit concerned about his fuel numbers? Because they're right on that bubble at the moment. One stop, he said, oh, yeah, look, it might be a little bit shorter, but that's for the rest of the pack. Matt Wagner's going to come to pit road earlier than the rest of these guys.
Yeah, he'll likely be pitting, I'm looking at it, he's probably going to be pitting around lap 59.60, though we're hearing some drivers pitting right now on lap 55, which is surprising. I'd say this is a little bit early compared to the fuel numbers we got. I was hearing 22 to 23 after they came for their first fuel tank. So these drivers are coming in a little bit earlier than I expected.
But at this stage, there's 25 laps in the race. That actually does get them home. There's 45 laps left in the race. One stop at 23, one stop at 22, Alex. That does do it, but that means that you've got to go aggressive on it. Matt Wagner just jumped on the radio. He recognizes he's losing time to everyone else at this point in time. He has to come to the pit lane. He needs to get out of Charles Teed's draft. He needs those fresh tires, and he's going to be coming in.
I mean, you say 22, 23, they're going to be a little bit tight, but that run from AJ Hobson was only 21 laps. He only made it that far on fuel before he had to pit. So these drivers are having a little bit shorter of a fuel load than we expected. And with how tight it is to the finish, I think fuel saving is going to be a big deal if this goes green.
Do you think potentially Matt Wagner's compromised right now? He's come to pit lane. It's lap 56 to transition to lap 57. At this point in time, there's 44 laps. That's 2 stint of 22 exactly. And, well, most drivers tend to want to celebrate after a race win. That would leave him without enough fuel to celebrate.
I mean, I don't think he cares whether he has the fuel to celebrate as long as he's the one celebrating, because that's going to be extremely tight. I mean, if, once again, he's not able to make a 22-lap stint, he won't be able to make it to the finish, especially if he stays out front on his own like he's been so far this entire race.
And where he's come out as well, 2.4 seconds up the road from AJ Hobson, still getting up to momentum, but he has made a little bit of time to AJ Hobson or stayed neutral. The critical factor here is, can Craig Forsyth, Jim Brooks, Nick DeGroot work together and make some extra time right now, or can they go further to the point whereby they're fuel saving and they make that time up within the pit window?
All right, now I'm seeing something a little bit interesting here. Nick DeGroot pit on the same exact lap as Matt Wagner, but he did go that one extra lap further. So there is precedent to actually make it that much further, but we have to account for the fact that Nick DeGroot was in the pack a little bit. He might have been lifting a little bit just to save a little bit of fuel to make that extra lap. Matt Wagner does not have that luxury.
Nick DeGroot did also actually do a lot of pushing with Craig Forsyth that stint as well. Does that play into it? I mean, he could have saved a lot more if he didn't have to go pack hunting.
Possibly that could be a thing that is true, but you do have to consider this track is just so fast, and with how quickly they were going, I would argue that that was a bit more aggressive of a stint than you'd think. So maybe they can make it 23, and we've just been seeing drivers pit in just to not lose track position.
Well, we're going to find out. This fuel stint is the most critical of the race. You need to get to, I would have to say, lap 77. You have to get to the end of lap 77. You get to the end of lap 77, you're getting home every single day of the week. You only get to the end of lap 76, there is a huge question mark over whether or not you will make it home, and you're going to have to be fuel saving. That means you can't race. That means you can't fight for position. Let's take a look as these cars rejoin the racing surface, where they're going to pop out in terms of things as well. Jim Brooks is a long way clear in terms of fuel status. He only needs to make this stint go 20 laps, and then he can short pit on the final stint. He's going to have better tires underneath him. He's in a phenomenal position to pick up his first win of the season as well. He's going to slot in right in front of AJ Hobson. AJ Hobson has Craig Forsyth. There's a three-way pack. It was a five-car pack behind Matt Wagner that was looking to hunt him down. Now we're back to three.
I'm actually looking at one driver right here who has not come into the pit lane yet. I don't believe, unless if he just came in the last time by, he did. So Eric Schaus currently in the middle of a pack with Kyle Brooks, Nick DeGroot, and all of them. He first came in at lap 37 and pit in on at the end of lap 59. So he did make a 22-lap stint in full. So there is a good chance that they can make it to the end of this race without needing that extra pit stop.
So what's your number? What lap number can you say that when I pit on this lap number, I am definitely making it home?
If you're, I feel like that's the lap that you said, end of lap 77 going on to lap 78. I think if you make it to there, as long as your gaps are big enough for somebody like Matt Wagner, he might have a gap that if he can make it to that lap, he might be able to save a little bit to try and save that one extra lap to be safe, or just save just enough to make it.
So there's two stories within that, and I think you mentioned Matt Wagner. I think that's critical. Wagner, where he is right now, cannot save. He cannot save and maintain that margin. However, the pack behind him has had a few cars get chopped out of it. Now it's only a three-car pack. He drops in there. There's 4 cars in that pack. He saves enough. He gets home every day of the week. Is that a better strategy, giving up a 2-second margin, than pushing hard right now and not getting home?
I'd say as of right now, you try and keep your gap. But I think there's a bit of a strategy you can try and play. With the position that he's in later on in the run, I'd say the last quarter of the run, you could try and run a little bit lighter on the throttle down in, say, turn 1, maybe a little bit to the entry of turn 3. Just lift a little bit out of the throttle to save a little bit of fuel as much as you can, and maybe try and make it that little bit further.
So, and then critically as well, if you're fuel saving just to get to a number where you can fuel save to get home, that's critical for your... If you get to lap 80, you can push the whole time, can't you?
Oh, for sure. If you get to lap 80, there is no fuel saving for you. You are going as hard as humanly possible, and you're going to try and just see if you could mess up everybody who is trying to fuel save. The question is, I don't think there is anybody towards the front of this field that is that close on fuel to be able to do that. Though, I'm looking... Chris Forsyth did pit on lap 59, so he should pretty easily make it to that 77-78 mark. So I think he will be one that's going to be aggressive here at the field.
I agree with you, but he's not doing that. That's not what we're seeing out on track at this point in time. He's actually being very, very conservative. So is he trying to short pit and catch Matt Wagner through the pit stops? Is that his goal here?
actually, you may have a point there. There are two strategies here. There is that one, which I'd say is the one that is going to get him closer to Wagner early on. But there's this one here where he is in a bit of a pack right now. He can save and go a little bit longer. And if he could push extremely hard, he may be able to catch up into the draft and just go right by him. But those are two strategies that you could try and pull. And maybe the short pit might be the one that wins the race.
I'm having a look, and I'm just sort of flicking back through mentally. What are the most recent results whereby pit lane strategies have been critical? I think my internet just cut out my... Yeah, we're back. So, and every single time that pit lane has been such a critical factor has been when Craig Forsyth has come out on top. Now, I know from personal experience dealing with Nick DeGroot, he has always said, fuel saving is my biggest weakness. Driving to that number is not something I am particularly good at, and knowing what my number is and where my strategy is. He is a phenomenal driver. He has talent coming out every pore in his body. That guy can drive a race car. However, fuel strategy, you have to be the best driver of everyone. You have to be able to do it all, Alex, and it is near impossible to be able to do it all without a crew chief. And that's the difference between sim racing and real life racing. Those guys have crew chiefs.
Yeah, but I would argue at the same time, iRacing does provide a little bit of a nifty feature. It's not fully accurate at the beginning of runs, but once you get into a run long enough, 5 to 10 laps, they do have a fuel number option. You can look at it and see what your estimated fuel numbers are, and if you run consistent enough laps, you can see how far you can make it. I've used it a good number of times, especially since some of the races I run are quite long and do end up having fuel as be a pretty big strategy. That's kind of the tool I'm forced to use for the most part, as I often don't have a crew chief as well.
And it's a mental load. Whilst you're doing those numbers and you're looking at those numbers and you're saying, this is what I need to drive to, you're not focused on the race 100% as well, and that can cause issues.
Yeah, that is a big problem. I've noticed, while I was doing that, one of the big things I had to learn was just to try and be smooth on it while not overdoing it. That was a thing that I had to try and learn, is that while you're fuel saving, for the most part, you're not on throttle nearly as much. And you overestimate how fast you're going into corners because you have it in your head in a repetitive system of you going through these corners at a certain speed, and the moment you start slowing up to try and save fuel, you forget just how hard you can go into the corner, and you oftentimes take it way too easy and lose a ton of lap time.
We see that quite often with guys, particularly in endurance racing, that they look like they've got the race locked up a little bit. They've got laps. They might have 3/4 of a lap over somebody. They go, look, I'm just going to go into race management mode. Well, when you're not driving at the same pace, and when you're not taking the same entry markers, when you're not braking in the same place, obviously, not as much braking as what happens in oval racing, particularly at Pocono. But it's a different rhythm. It's completely. So I completely understand exactly where you're going with that, and I agree wholeheartedly. Right, race situation. What has been happening over the last couple of laps in terms of where our drivers are running? Well, Matt Wagner seems to have been slowly getting pulled back in. It's AJ Hobson, Jim Brooks working together, seems to be working. It's stabilized a little bit. It's crept back a little bit. What are they going to be able to do this time by? We'll find out in a few moments. It is a 41.270 for Matt Wagner, 41.444 for the next three drivers. So they are not making ground. I tell you what, Nick DeGroot, 41.3. So Wagner has picked up the pace once again. He is attempting to blow the covers off this thing and drive off into the sunset.
Yeah, he's been driving an extremely consistent pace this entire run. He didn't start off running very fast like some of the other drivers had been. He immediately started 1 to 2 tenths slower than everybody else in the field. So he started off with a careful, steady pace. That may be why he's able to run the fuel numbers that he's been running, is that he just hasn't been running as hard right at the beginning as other people have, and hasn't been abusing his tires as much. And so he's able to keep a consistent pace over the long run.
Well, final moments of the race are just a few laps away. Lap number 72, the current lap that we are on. Pit lane critical lap number is the end of lap 77. You can definitely make it home from lap 77. The driver's pitting on lap 76. That's only a couple laps away. They are going to have to fuel save like crazy to make it home. Now, Charles Teen throw him back into the mix because he's come out of the pits. That's a drafting support driver for these guys. And again, fresh tires. This time, Matt Wagner has cleared him. He's not going to pose a threat to Matt Wagner. And, well, Alex, there's a word that we probably shouldn't talk about. It's a thing. Barney, sitting at the flag stand, he likes to wave that thing a lot, and it's the yellow flag.
Well, I'd argue these guys have been running pretty clean this entire race. Definitely not a commentator's curse whatsoever, but the positioning of Charles Teed right at the moment is actually, I would argue, ideal for the drivers behind, like AJ Hobson, Brooks, and Forsyth, is that he's on new tires and is a lap car in front of them. They're going to be getting a lot of draft on the straightaway, while Teed's going to be running way faster through the corners and opening up the gap again. So they're going to be able to run a lot faster laps to keep up with Wagner and actually pull in the gap a little bit. But as I say that, they start racing for position behind this driver. That's going to lose them some lap time.
Yeah, it's going to be critical from a few different standpoints. Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a cracking race thus far. If you're enjoying it, it is about to go into overdrive. This thing has been phenomenal. The drivers have done a phenomenal job. Now, can they close it out? Matt Wagner has led so much of this motor race. Can he lock it all up? AJ Hobson, I tell you what, I've just been keeping an eye on, just ran very slow in the first sector. Maybe that dirty air from Charles Teed is actually causing him an issue. And Craig Forsyth just said on the radio, I want you out of the way. I want our pack working together, please.
Yeah, I think the problem there on that previous lap was that Jim Brooks actually pulled it to the inside entering turn one, and so they lost a bunch of time as none of the cars were able to evenly run through the corner. There was dirty air from Charles Teed, and they were side by side, so they lost a good chunk of time rather than staying in line and running a good lap. We'll see what the lap time is this time around, but as I say that, they're starting to race again.
That's critical. Well, they've decided that maybe racing Matt Wagner is not going to happen. Maybe that is a foregone conclusion. They're just going to let it happen. Alternatively, does Craig Forsyth have better tires underneath him? Does he think that he should be at the front of this pack at this point in time? Jim Brooks and AJ Hobson don't really think so, and Craig's he's still playing his cards very close to his chest. And I get the feeling that the comments we made earlier in the stream about him fuel saving, about him tire saving, they are all coming true. And have a look at that pack behind as well. Craig Forsyth, the gap between him and Nick DeGroot, it's closing up a little bit. That is critical. AJ Hobson is coming to pit road this time. In conclusion of lap number 76, he is fuel compromised. This is going to be difficult for AJ. He is giving up his spot in the queue. He is potentially giving up a podium because he has to come to the pits. He cannot go any further. And look at Forsyth immediately.
Yeah, Forsyth has been saving pretty much this entire race. He's been running a little bit longer stints than some of the other people. He may be able to pit on the same lap as Wagner, but have a shorter pit stop and will be able to close up the gap some. But somebody that you talked to earlier wasn't a good fuel saver. Nick DeGroot, his previous stint was 23 laps. He actually went the farthest of anybody else on fuel on that previous stint. And so he actually pit later than even... he actually pit at the same time as Forsyth. But he was better at fuel saving. And he's caught up to Forsyth as well. So they're not actually as far off as I just checked Matt Wagner in the pit lane.
And this is a Matt Wagner strategy that you're seeing. He does this quite regularly. He is a big fan of the undercut. Those lap times that were starting to fall away. He knew he had an advantage. He wanted to come to pit road early. Craig Forsyth has backed things off once again. Jim Brooks has got control of this pack. And now Charles Teed has pulled away from them. So there's no more drafting support coming the way of Jim Brooks. Will Craig Forsyth come to pit road this time by Jim Brooks? No, these are the last two drivers to pit under the last pit cycle. Another car making their entry into pit lane in the background. I think that was Brew Parker. No, it was Eric Peterson. Brew Parker's in behind him. Jeff Highsong's coming into the pits behind him. Now it is crunch time for these drivers in their pit crews. You've got to stop on those marks. You've got to get these cars pulled up nice and cleanly. Locking brakes in the pits. It's a big problem for these guys, and they've got to be on point.
I've been checking some lap times. DeGroot, Forsyth, Brooks have been running extremely fast lap times. Lap times that you would expect on brand new tires right here at the end of this stint. They're trying to gain some time on Wagner just before they come into the pit lane. None of them take the hard left-hand turn yet, but I imagine they have to be pitting the next time by if they want to make it to the end of this race with a chance to win.
Where did Matt Wagner come out on pit road? At the moment, he is P6, and he is off on his own. So that clear air for Matt Wagner continues. P number 7, P number 8 is AJ Hobson, Eric Peterson. Peterson is a lot closer to AJ Hobson than he was. Nick DeGroot has come to the pits this time by. Jim Brooks, will he go another lap? Haven't heard anything from him in the Forsyth on the radio. Final round of stops. Underway. Green flag pit stops. Nick DeGroot will dive on a pit lane off at turn 3 and 4. Craig Forsyth happy to keep things as they are on the racetrack. What we need to see, 41.342 from Jim Brooks, a 41.435. Sorry, 4.32, 4.35 from Craig Forsyth. He'll dive into the inside. What is the time for Matt Wagner? He'll come through in just a moment. He's coming, I swear. He's on his run to turn number 3. That's why I couldn't see him. Where did Nick DeGroot come out of the pits as well? That's also going to be critical.
Yeah, Nick DeGroot is just coming out of the pit lane now, but Wagner's crossing the start-finish line. Wagner is definitely going to clear him before turn 1, but it's a matter of how close is Nick DeGroot going to be. It's going to take him all the way down.
Here we go!
To almost turn 3 before he catches up. But here comes Eric Peterson, AJ Hobbs out of turn 1, and yeah, drivers are on pit lane. Brooks, Forsyth actually ahead of Brooks into the pit lane. That may be crucial on that track position.
Yeah, Forsyth very good on his entry to pit lane. Pulls it up, a little bit of brake lockup, but he's on the marks. Will that cost him time in pit lane? Gael Brooks takes another lap lead and strikes it out through his book. Another phenomenal fuel stint from Gael. Will he play himself back into contention with how short his final pit stop's going to be? Forsyth leads them off pit road. Matt Wagner coming down the main straight at this point in time. Is Forsyth going to be close? Wagner sweeps around. Wagner's in the lead. Forsyth looking for that drop. Here is the big moment of the motor race. Does Craig Forsyth go along with Matt Wagner, or is that margin too much?
I'm not sure. It's going to be extremely close. It's just over a second. It may have just been a little bit too far away, but remember, Matt Wagner pulled the undercut on these guys. He pit on lap 78. He's going to have to go exactly 22 laps. Last time by, he went from 57 to 78. I'm not sure he's going to make it unless if he fuel saves a little bit.
He's going to have to fuel save a little bit. Big question mark now lingers over Matt Wagner. Gael Brooks rejoins the racetrack. He's slotted in behind Craig Forsyth. The fuel-saving prowess of Gael Brooks. Could that be a critical factor? Nick DeGroot was the big loser in this round of pit stops. He got caught up in traffic. He's had to fight his way through it. The tires, they're going to be suffering at the back end of this run for Nick DeGroot. This could have championship implications. Does Matt Wagner win this race? Does Nick DeGroot see the whole bank of points back to Matt Wagner? Could we be looking at the tail end of the season at Pocono as being the turning point of Matt Wagner's season, where he really put his stamp of authority down? You've got 15 laps until we start to get to the point where we're going to decide things, ladies and gentlemen. Do not change your sets. Do not adjust your dials. Do not adjust your browser. Leave it right here on the Flat Out Racing Network with the Dark Horse Racing Series. Nick DeGroot now sends it to the inside of Jim Brooks. Jim Brooks will cede the place to him and Gael Brooks, the father-son duo of Jim and Gael. Right up there, right in contention. This is for third place on the track. Craig Forsyth only just ahead of these guys. Look at them fan out through turn 3. Schaus is in there. I thought Schaus had lost it early on. Very big player, very big contender in the opening laps, and then disappeared. It's like he just was not there. He was on holiday for the middle of the race. Now he's there. Now he's competing for a podium spot once again. Gael Brooks now starts to pull away from these two. DeGroot gets fought by Schaus. This is critical. This is about track position at this point in time. Gael's got a huge draft. He's starting to pull up onto the rear bumper of Craig Forsyth, and Matt Wagner's gap just continues to run away.
Yeah, let's not forget Schaus on the last restart that we had made contact with the back end of Forsyth that ended up losing him all the track position, but it doesn't seem to be he got damage that affected him that badly, as he's very easily able to make positions as he's pulled to the inside of Gael, trying to go for that third position.
Yeah, now he'll get all the way down there. Gael will see it. He's got the top line, so he will slot back in. right behind Eric Schaus. Nick de Groot has to bide his time. He has to let Gael have this one. He is going to have a triple draft for Nick de Groot, so he is very quick in a straight line at the moment. 5 cars, throw a blanket over them. They are so close together. They need to work together if they're going to haul in Matt Wagner. And that margin from Wagner, we need to see the lap time. Is that tumbling? Is that extending? What is the go for Matt Wagner? Does he have to save?
See, as we cross the line, this time by 2/10 for Eric Schaus on Matt Wagner. They gained a ton that lap.
They gained a huge amount of margin. I'm wondering, Alex, can you jump on board? In fact, Jeff, our broadcaster, can you jump on board with Matt Wagner? We're going to have to see this cockpit. We have to listen to his engine. Is he fuel saving? Is he compromised? Is this race over for Matt Wagner? Well, Alex, what's the call?
I'm watching him down the front straightaway. He's not shifting in the 6th gear to try and save any fuel, so he's running standard hard laps, but he's just getting caught by the drivers behind, who probably are just running as hard as they can to close the gap, as Eric Schaus less than a second now.
Yeah, well, we've seen it every time. Later on in the stint, the drivers get caught in the aero bubble, and all of a sudden their pace drops off a long way. Matt Wagner is going to have fresh tires. Pocono, hot tires, very hot race course, very hard time for the tires, high speeds, banking in 1, a little bit of banking in 2, no banking in 3. That's the situation, the tricky triangle. It is the trifecta of trouble for these drivers, and well, Craig Forsyth once again to the inside of Eric Schaus. He's looking to make that time. Can they mount a charge back? Matt Wagner has had control of the race for such a long period of time. He is going to walk away with most laps led today by a landslide, but is it all going to fall away in the dying moments? I tell you what, Alex, we've got under 12 laps to go now. We're 11 and a half, less than that. We're 11 and a quarter.
We've got 11 and a quarter, now 11. These drivers are getting extremely close as Eric Schaus has closed the gap down to 6.5 tenths. He is running extremely fast, running some of the fastest lap times I've seen in the race, of 40.6 earlier a few laps ago.
Yeah, well, lap time's starting to tumble for the guys that are in the draft. They had to add less fuel. The margin that Matt Wagner had worked so hard to build, he is now watching that tumbling. That takes its mental toll on you as a driver. But there's still going to be 10 and a quarter worth of laps here to go. You've got to rebuild yourself. You've got to construct yourself. You've got to compose yourself. It's not done yet. You can still have the last laugh if you are Matt Wagner. But Eric Schaus says, I want to win this thing. Craig Forsyth right there. Big championship implications for all of these drivers that are in this lead 5. One of those drivers is going to walk away a champion here tonight. Which one will it be?
Yeah, and almost most notably, and one of the most unfortunate circumstances for Matt Wagner is one of the drivers catching up to them very quickly is Nick de Groot, his championship rival right now. He's sitting there in the 4th position, possibly just biding his time, waiting to see these drivers fight, as Eric Schaus for the lead on Matt Wagner. First time he's been passed in the last almost 80 laps. Matt Wagner down to 2nd place with Eric Schaus to the point.
Yeah, Forsyth right there. Nick de Groot watches this and says, I just want to read these guys. Matt Wagner still has the opportunity to save some fuel and get home here. Maybe that fuel question mark over him was too much of a big question mark. Maybe he needed to drop back earlier in the piece whilst it was only a 3-car chain. Under that last round of fuel pit stops. We'll never know. We'll never get that opportunity. Can he still play a part in this final race of the line? Nick de Groot now passes him to the outside. De Groot is there underneath the rear wing of Craig Forsyth. This is IndyCar, ladies and gentlemen. This is how close these guys race at such high speeds with high stakes for incredible lengths of time. That is the beauty that is an IndyCar.
Eric Schaus doing some extreme weaving down the straightaway. Be careful not to get a penalty there. The FIA may be mad. Wait a minute. That's F1.
Yeah, these cars, more circuit-based racing brethren. Whole host of changes coming through to F1, more sprint races. Oh, that was good news to see coming our way out of the FIA over the last few days. And, well, they're building up to the season opener in Bahrain, taking a lot of cues from IndyCar, actually, with the way that they're trying to create closer racing. So, well, with that tangent dealt with and out to the side, Matt Wagner continues his drift back through the pack. Now, again, I'm going to mention it. He hasn't run a lot of his laps in the draft, but he is an experienced campaigner. Matt Wagner is one of the smartest drivers you come across. He builds the setups for these league, Alex, and that having knowledge of the car inside and out at a point like this is critical.
It definitely is. I mean, I drove the setup myself, and while I'd say the knowledge of the setup is very helpful indeed, I would argue that the setup is simple enough to understand for most of these drivers that it is just a full throttle grip setup as they're coming up on the lap car. Charles T, that is extremely tight there. Forsyth almost made contact with either Schaus or De Groot. They got really tight there as Schaus easily makes his way through as the fight for the lead is still raging.
And what a difficult position to put yourself in as Charles Teed. You were in with a shot of this one. You qualified on pole. You had to let all that go. Small mistake off the exit of turn 3. Now it's Nick de Groot that's back to his inside, and Nick de Groot was the guy that he was following at the point in time where it all come apart for Charles Teed. De Groot is going to get the spot away from him this time. Teed looks like he's biting, unfortunately, down on his pride, and he's letting this one happen. He doesn't want to get involved in anything as it happens in his opening, the closing final laps. And Schaus now assaulted 3 wide for the lead. Nick de Groot takes it away from Craig Forsyth. We're getting names going everywhere here at this point in time. Nick de Groot in the inside.
Schaus tagged the wall off turn 3. He got tight out of turn 3 and tapped the outside wall. He may possibly have damage, but as of right now, he doesn't seem to be losing that much.
Oh, Forsyth gets really tight. Had to lift out of the throttle. He's got no momentum. Matt Wagner back in this one. It is not over yet. Charles T is still fighting within this group. He said, I'm going to let you have it. I'm going to drop back within this pack. Well, he still wants to be there. He still wants to go motor racing. He's still entitled to positions out on the track. It's a tricky conundrum for the drivers to deal with, particularly when you're a lap car, Alex.
I'd argue Charles Teed is just doing what's best for him, because if he could find his way around that leader and a caution comes out from this extremely hard racing, he could find his way as Eric Schaus is going around to try and get the position on track behind Nick de Groot, who's currently been pulling away.
Yeah, de Groot gives it, Schaus will get taken by Schaus takes Charles Teed at this point in time. Jim Brooks has just put the foot down as well. Gael now is the one that's tasked with overtaking Matt Wagner. Matt Wagner is struggling. His race is now gone. You'd have to say he had a very strong opportunity at the opening of this stint. He needed more of a margin. He didn't get it. Now he is just compromised. Left, right, and center. Schaus now starting to climb back on towards Nick de Groot. It is going to be chaos. There's 3 laps left to go. There's 9 turns in total. Now we're into 8.5. Now it's 8. Schaus takes the lead. Forsyth drifts up in the middle of the corner. Forsyth is struggling in the middle of 1 and 2, and that's going to be critical to whether or not he can win this race. Nick de Groot swap drafts with Eric Schaus.
Forsyth has really been struggling in the corners, but somebody who hasn't been struggling in the corners is Nick de Groot. He mentioned earlier in the race, not much of a fuel saver, but has some insane pace, and he's showing it right now. When fuel isn't the answer, he'll be there at the front of the field as Forsyth really close to the outside wall. Did he make contact?
Well, Craig Forsyth and Charles Teed. The question over the last few rounds is lapped cars. What do you do with them? Why do you do it with them that way? And is it working for these guys? They're a part of the race. You can't just tell them to get out of the way. 2 laps now left to run. There's 5 corners left in this race. Eric Schaus is at the lead. Now it's Nick de Groot. Charles Teed will follow him through. Will Teed play a factor? Is Eric Schaus about to win a race? It's been a long time for Eric Schaus since he's won. He's led a lot more laps here today than he has in a good while. He's had the pace. He's been a little bit unlucky on restarts. Now, with 1 lap left to go, 3 turns, 40 seconds remain in this motor race. Is it Eric Schaus?
Well, Eric Schaus is making the move.
Schaus to the inside. Lead. Nick de Groot tries to come back down. He tries the crisscross. Will look to get underneath him. Forsyth building the momentum on the high side. Schaus and Nick de Groot side by side. Last turn. There's 2 turns left to go. Now there's one. Eric Schaus on the high side. Looks for a draw. Craig Forsyth going to cut him off. Schaus cannot come down the track now. Where does de Groot run? Forsyth looking to stick his nose in there. Forsyth won't get it. The run on the high side for Eric Schaus. One final stretch. It's Nick de Groot. He goes back to back. Area 51 yesterday, and Eric Schaus will miss out. Nick de Groot takes 1 yesterday in the IR18 in Area 51. He takes 1 today in the DW12. And what form it's been over the last few weeks for Nick de Groot. He will extend the championship margin. And where did Matt Wagner cross the line? He ran out of fuel. Matt Wagner crossed in P9.
That was the crucial thing we were watching for when he made that pit stop, was will he make it to the end? And a disaster struck. Not only did he run out of fuel, but his championship rival, Nick de Groot, wins the race. That gap at the front of the point standings is going to be massive. And to credit Nick de Groot, that was some fantastic positioning on the last lap to put the drivers behind in a circumstance that they could not get out of.
And that's the biggest thing, isn't it? It's on the last lap, it's about positioning your car in one of the most difficult spots for other cars to punch their way through. And that's exactly what he did coming into turn 3. That margin could have been built on the top side. And, well, Schaus had to go. This race went right down to the wire in terms of fuel strategy, in terms of how you look after the tires, in terms of when you got to the front, in terms of your drafting partners. Every single aspect of this race here at Legacy Pocono in the Dark Horse DW12 League, it was examined by the drivers tonight. Nick de Groot came out on top.
That was the definition of a race here at the Pocono Raceway, especially here at the Legacy track. Hard racing, bumpy racetrack, tight corners, and just seemingly drivers that just would not quit even when it looked like it was over. Matt Wagner, for most of this race, dominated, looked like he was way out in front, but Pocono showed its teeth. Fuel was the important answer to the question of Matt Wagner winning this race. He could not answer it. Nick de Groot did, positioned himself well, and wins this race.
And it was critical from Nick de Groot, the crossover. He had to let Eric Schaus get ahead of him going down into turn 1. As a race driver, it's the last lap of the race. You got to be cool, calm, and collected, and it's the most difficult period of the race to be so. Why? Well, in a few corners' time, the winner will be decided. He gets to the inside, he picks a little bit of the draft up, gets the run, but most importantly, the track position. He has priority through this tunnel turn right here. That's what run the race. He let Schaus go down into turn number 1, and he made sure he had the momentum off of turn 1, and that was absolutely critical. That gave him the race win, Alex.
Almost as crucial as that is Forsyth as well, finding position on the inside of the tunnel turn inside of Schaus. Had Schaus been able to back up and get behind de Groot, he might have been to the inside and been our winner into turn 3, but Forsyth, with the position he was in, stopped those 2 drivers from finding their way around de Groot, and de Groot is our winner.
Wow, what an introduction to the Dark Horse DW12 series for Alex Kolonix. Well, you thought that was enough. Now you get to talk to the drivers that were indeed involved. We are going to have Craig Forsyth here on standby in just a few moments to have a chat to us about that race. He sounded a little teed off in the driver's chat, I will say. I think he was looking for a little bit more drafting support, but we'll chat to him about it right now. Hey Craig, it's Scott and Alex up here in the FRN booth. Have you got us? We'll go once more. Craig Forsyth, have you got us up here in the Flat Out Racing Network broadcast booth?
You betcha, Scott.
There you go. An interesting race. Fuel strategy played its part. You saw Matt Wagner dominate the middle stretch of the race, and we were always a little bit worried that he was just that little bit far out in front and that he could save enough fuel to get home.
I could never figure out if my rear wing was damaged or not from that one restart. I didn't seem to have the speed other guys did, but I could never get the fast repair to work. So this is what the car had, I guess.
Yeah, the irony in that whole thing is the two of you who made contact on that restart finished second and third. I mean, was that anything that was concerning you? Was after a certain point, did you just start to forget about it, or was it always in your mind the whole time?
Anytime I was on my own, I was having trouble keeping up with cars ahead of me. I think I was 2.5 seconds ahead, but I was on my own and watching Matt drive away and the guys behind me catching up. So, yeah, it was constantly the whole race in my mind.
Well, let's talk about championship now and championship implications coming out of that race. To use words from a competitor from last season, Dylan Moskowitz, championship implications. Closing the margin down on Nick de Groot didn't happen tonight, but there's a potential that you've jumped Matt Wagner in the process. So do the eyes start to set themselves towards the Indy 500 at the tail end of the series? Are you trying to get yourself in a position to compete for a championship in 6 weeks' time?
You always want to compete for it. I mean, that's why we're driving every week. We want to see ourselves on the podium. So yeah, that's a race I'm looking forward to. But yeah, I honestly I was so focused on catching Matt that I didn't realize that he was fuel saving and running out of fuel. So him suddenly letting us go by, and then when I realized how far back he was falling, I was like, holy cow, he doesn't have enough fuel.
Yeah, I was wondering that entire race. You were one of the ones we were pointing out a lot, that we were pointing you and saying you're definitely a fantastic fuel saver. Did you think you had a significant advantage over the field in that department?
If the first caution had fallen at the right time, yes, but it had fallen far enough in that we were going to be able to make it to the end. I guess make it to the end as long as you were relatively attentive to, not burning max fuel constantly, but I'm rarely ever burning max fuel.
Well, Craig, another solid result here again tonight. You've been on a little bit of a roll lately. It's a great opportunity for you to say thank you to your sponsors and any other shout outs you may have.
Oh, I got a shout out to Jim over at my brain is turned off. LMCgear.com, my team sponsor, and everyone over at Dark Horse, and even had the words with Charles, but now we're going to go work on a computer. So all the guys here in Dark Horse, we all talk to each other. It's week in, week out. We're here to race, and that's what we like to do.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations to Craig Forsyth. Takes away himself another podium this season. P3, he was thinking it might have been a P1 tonight. Didn't come his way, but regardless, you still take points at the end of the night. Thank you very much for your time, Craig.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Alex. Stay safe.
Just got word through at that point in time that unfortunately we won't actually be able to chat to our racer winner, Nick de Groot. He's had to jump out of things, but it's been a long time between trips to the commentary booth for Eric Schaus, and we'll get the opportunity to chat to him now. Hi, Eric, Scott, and Alex up here in the FRN commentary booth. That was a cracking race. You had to feel your heart sink to the floor on that restart, though, with the incident with Craig Forsyth.
Yeah, absolutely. I just mistimed that. I knew that the leader had gone, so I jumped, and I didn't expect Craig to take quite as long as he did. So that was my fault running in the back of him there. I immediately hopped out of line and tried to do the walk of shame. So I'm glad it worked out for both of us. Neither of us took any damage from it, it seemed like.
Closing up. Sorry, Alex, I'll give you the opportunity now.
Hey, don't worry. It's fine. If you got questions, you got questions. But if you give me the opportunity, I want to ask you a question. There at the end of the race, I mean, for most of it after that restart, you were not in position to get the win of the race. As a matter of fact, you weren't even in the pack following Matt Wagner. But what did you have to do throughout the pit cycles and your on-track performance to find your way into that position at the end of the race?
Well, a lot of the race for me was fuel saving. I was just trying to go a little bit longer, so I had tires and fuel at the end, or at least options. They worked out okay. I was trying to stay with the packs. One of those pits, I left my pit limiter on coming out of the pits, and that cost me a couple seconds, which dropped me back to the one of the previous packs. But then from there, I just worked with Nick, and we were able to catch back up to the lead pack, and from there, it was anybody's game.
Look, I mean, it's been a long time between trips to the podium. It must feel like a relief to get a P2 crossed off, but you kind of got to feel a little bit aggrieved. You look like probably one of the stronger cars there at the tail end of the race. Did you feel you had enough to take it to Nick de Groot?
Yeah, I mean, I had a rough start to the season, so it's nice to be on the podium here. Nick's really strong at this track. I also really enjoy this track. I tend to have a good finish here. But with me, Craig, and Nick all up front there, I decided to just work with Nick and secure a second, and not and try to battle off Craig in the back there. And if it worked out that I was in the lead coming through 3 there at the end, that would have been nice. But it just worked the other way, and Nick got the win there.
Well, congratulations once again, Eric. It's an absolute pleasure to see you doing so well once again. It's really, really good to see coming out of you the return to form. So, is there anyone that you have to thank right now for assisting you with getting back to speed that you've showed in previous seasons?
Yeah, just thanks to the league for putting these on. The more you run, the better you get. So it's nice to have this series to run in, and then thanks to you guys for the broadcast, and thanks to the admins and everybody out there watching. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your time, Eric. Go celebrate a little bit and enjoy things there this evening. Congratulations on another podium.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well, Alex, a long night comes to an end, and that's your first taste of the Dark Horse DW12 League. A lot of notes to take away there, and an interesting race, back and forth. Fuel strategy, a big part of that one.
Yeah, I saw for sure the massive impact of fuel strategy there at the finish. I wasn't sure how much of an impact it was going to be at the beginning, especially considering what numbers we had that were given. But that one caution really made things interesting for these drivers and made it a lot tighter than I expected it to be.
Even though haven't got Nick de Groot here to chat to for the race win, unfortunately, this evening, I actually do want to reach out to someone and just see if he's available for a quick chat. That's going to be Matt Wagner, because he's not an emotional guy. He feels aggrieved a little bit this season. It hasn't been his season, and I'd like to have a quick chat to him and see what he thoughts. Matt, it's Scott and Alex Kolonix up here in the FRN broadcast booth, mate. It's a disappointing result, unfortunately, this evening. But man, I thought, he's got it. This will be win number 3 for Matt, and you were looking like you were going to have a great night there. And fuel. Can't get home without the fuel.
It is what it is. I was a half lap short, so I was kind of banking on Charles when he came out of the pits during that last pit stop cycle. I was going to save right behind him, but unfortunately he was too slow to follow when he came out, and it was like, dude, I was like, I'm going to give up all that time. I just can't afford it. I tried to see if I could push an extra lap. I saw like 0.6. I'm like, damn it. So I'm like, if I would have somehow made that one extra lap, we have been talking to you in victory lane.
One thing I was interested watching the entire race is, unlike most of the other drivers in the field, you ran a very consistent, steady pace over your runs. You pretty much never dropped below a 1/10 of your initial lap time. So I'm curious of what that consistency was for you, and during those, were you ever thinking, I need to fuel save now, or was it just go up until later in the race?
Well, it was up until later in the race. There was one certain point where I did follow Charles there, and I was fuel saving right behind him, which I saved an extra lap, which is great. So I was kind of banking on him to come out there, but the consistency lap times, I tried to keep it in 5th gear. If I got it in 6th gear, the guys were going to eat me alive. I just can't afford the lost time. During that last stint, I tried to see if I could put in 6th gear to save a little bit more fuel, and I was watching my lap times drop, and it sucks. It's unfortunate, but it's racing. You win some and lose some.
I mean, talk to us about the emotions that go through your mind, A, during a race when you realize that you're going to be short on fuel, but also B, you've had probably one of the most polarizing seasons. When you finished a race, you finished in a very, very strong position. It's I think from the two races that you've had, clean races have actually both been wins. But at the other end of the scale, you've gotten some very, very unlucky circumstances, and tonight kind of fits right in the middle. It's you've run out of fuel, but running out of fuel is an issue of your own making, isn't it? It's sort of one of those things that, exactly what you said, the draft packs just did not fall your way.
Yeah, last week was a heartbreak for us. Fortunately, my headset went gray, and I ended up smacking the loop in the car coming on the pit road, and that was really unfortunate. Then, like 3 laps later, my headset completely shut off and lost connection to the server. And oh man, it's unfortunate that happened. And yeah, racing's all about adversity. You got your highs and you got your lows. Tonight was a high, probably for the first 90 laps, but the last 10 was kind of dreadful when I was talking to I call my crew chief Gael. He's my right hand man. He's the best teammate to ever have. Warned me about fuel, and he told me the situation, what I needed to do to try and finish. And unfortunately, we finished ninth. That's not what we wanted. We wanted at least a win here tonight to close that gap. And it is what it is, Scott. It's racing.
Yeah, I think that sums it up in a nutshell. It's racing. You cannot be a competitor and expect to win every week. That's never going to happen.
Oh,
so
no.
The fact
No.
that you've taken it with grace and taken it with full and say, yeah, it wasn't quite there in terms of fuel numbers. Take that in next week. Let's talk about next week now. Next week is short track racing over at Iowa. And it starts the run down to the championship finale at Indianapolis. So we are now past the halfway mark of the season, and Nick's got one hand on the trophy.
Don't forget, I'm not going to give my hopes down, okay? Because we got double points races coming up, so I am not going to cry over spilled milk. There's plenty of opportunities to gain more points back. So
would you cry over a spilled milkshake though?
Chocolate milkshake. Yeah, I'd be jealous. I personally like strawberry. That's just my favorite though. Yeah. So, like I said, it's racing. I love the short track scene. It's my favorite. I love Iowa and especially Richmond. It's a great, consistent track. You have to hit your marks right every time. If you don't, you're going to, especially in these cars, in these cars, they got high downforce and you're going to burn the tires up. If you're not consistent enough and you eat your tires alive, everybody's going to eat you up. So we'll be practicing over the course of the week, put some laps in.
All right, well, I just wanted to say a big shout out to you, Matt. Thank you very much for your time. Obviously, after a hard night of racing, and it's not always the easiest to talk to people immediately after that get interviewed. But this is your opportunity to say a few words about the people that are around you that make this possible.
Oh, well, unfortunately, I love my teammates. I love Jim and Gael. They are the best group to ever have side by side with me. And like I said, Gael is best crew chief ever. I got to thank Air 51 Dark Horse for putting this on the show. Teed and Eric Peterson, the setup was amazing. They put a very good setup. I really enjoyed it. But unfortunately, not a win today. But, I'm not going to hang my head low and go off into the sunset. We got some pretty highs today, so looking forward to next week.
All right, thank you very much for your time, Matt. Absolute pleasure talking to you as always.
Yep, always, man. See you guys.
All right, Alex, that's going to just about wrap things up here from the Dark Horse series in the DW12. I mean, like you said, you're experienced in the stock cars. Does this sort of pique your interest? That the racing out there was absolutely phenomenal tonight. It had a bit of everything. It had fuel strategy, had tire saving, it had caution, it had a restart. You know, it had issues for a lot of the drivers. And what a finish for Eric Schaus to come through adversity the way that he did. And we thought he caught the barrier or had them twice and still finished the P2. That's a phenomenal drive. Are you going to be back next week? You looking forward to some more DW12 action?
I definitely find these cars pretty fun to watch on these ovals for sure. And they found a way to make Pocono an entertaining race.
Oh, okay. All right, get out of the booth, you. You're not allowed to say bad words about Pocono with me. That is just not allowed.
Pocono's my closest track. I know what I'm talking about.
Well, look, I'm out here in Australia. None of these are my closest track, all right? Get out. Get out. You aren't allowed to say Pocono in a bad light. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that about wraps things up here from the Flat Out Racing Network. We hope you've had a good time. We've had a good time. We've had a good time bringing you the show. Catch you all again next week, same time, same YouTube channel, same esports TV channel as well for round number 7 of the Dark Horse DW12 series. It is Iowa, and we begin the run to the flag on the championship. Iowa, Kentucky, Richmond, Michigan, Chicagoland, and then the season finale at Indianapolis. Couple of major points rounds coming your way. Do not miss it again next week. Can anyone topple Nick DeGroot? That's the story of the championship. We'll see you again next time, and thank you for watching another broadcast courtesy of the Flat Out Racing Network.
This broadcast is the copyrighted work of Flat Out Racing Network and may not be rebroadcast, retranslated, or used in any form without the express written consent of Flat Out Racing Network and iRacing.com Motorsports Simulations. Flat Out Racing Network would like to thank you for your support, and we hope you enjoyed tonight's broadcast.